Hello, it's Broadcasting Scotland. Welcome to Scotland at 7. I'm Hugh Stewart and it's Friday the 3rd of December. Now tonight I'm going to be joined with Linda Fabiani, who's with me here in the studio.
Hi.
Hello, Linda. And online from Edinburgh, my colleague Andrew Wilson. And evening, Andrew, how are you?
Hugh, good evening. I'm great. How are you keeping?
Yes, I'm good, thanks. So we're going to discuss some of the big issues in the news this week. But if you two wouldn't mind waiting for a few minutes, I'm going to first of all read out the coronavirus numbers from today, and then I'm going to quickly go over the main news headlines, and then we'll focus on 2 or 3 topics now at the end of the week. Okay, so to begin with then, the coronavirus update. As of 2 p.m. today, a total of 3,698,351 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 2,962,601 have confirmed negative and 735,750 have tested positive. There are 2,432 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test today, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all of those with symptoms will be tested. There are 16 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 9,634. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the coronavirus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 652 were in hospital last night, 46 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. today, 4,350,133 people had received their first dose of the COVID vaccination, and 3,954,992 have received a second dose, while 1,790,728 have received a third or booster dose. The latest UK daily figures show 145,424 patients who had tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness. That's an increase of 143 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just in hospitals. Increase in Omicron cases. Omicron cases no longer linked to a single event. There are currently 6 Omicron cases linked to a Steps concert on the 22nd of November in Glasgow. However, no cases have as yet been identified from the second Steps concert on the 23rd of November. Risk to those who attended the concert is low, and those who may have come into contact with the Omicron are being contacted. No one from the concert needs to isolate unless asked to by Test and Protect, or unless they develop symptoms. Commenting on the increase in Omicron cases to 29, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said, "The number of Omicron cases now being reported in Scotland is rising, and cases are no longer all linked to a single event, but to several different sources, including the Steps concert at the Hydro on the 22nd of November. This confirms our view that there is now community transmission of this variant within Scotland. Given the nature of transmission, we would expect to see cases rise, perhaps significantly, in the days ahead. However, health protection teams are continuing work through contact tracing, isolation and testing to slow the spread as far as possible while we learn more about the new variant's impact. Ministers are also keeping the situation under daily review." Lord's report says the UK government's risk planning is weak and secretive. Assessment and planning by the government relating to risks facing the UK are deficient and veiled in secrecy, a report has found. The 129-page report entitled "Preparing for Extreme Risks, Building a Resilient Society" was produced by the House of Lords Select Committee on Risk Assessment and Risk Planning, a group appointed in October 2020. James Arbuthnot, chair of the committee, said that while the UK's risk assessment processes had been praised across the world before the pandemic, the impact of COVID suggested that there may be problems. It has been advised that if there were to be a coronavirus pandemic as a country, we could suffer up to 100 deaths, he said. Over 140,000 deaths later, we realised that perhaps we have been doing rather better in our assessment and our planning. Sorry, we could perhaps have been doing rather better in our assessment and planning. The report, which draws on sources including oral evidence from 85 witnesses, including Chief Scientific Advisor Sir Patrick Vallance during 29 sessions, looked at the country's approach to assessing and preparing for a wide range of risks, from chemical warfare to the climate crisis and severe space weather. The report's conclusions point to a number of shortcomings. Among them, the committee highlighted a tendency for the government to focus on immediate problems rather than preparing for the long term. Among other issues, the report criticised a lack of transparency by the government. Review into Moray maternity services. Welcoming the publication of the independent report of the Moray Maternity Services Review, Health Secretary Humza Yousaf said, "The Scottish Government commissioned this report as part of our commitment to the reintroduction of consultant-led maternity services at Dr. Gray's in a safe and sustainable way. I am grateful to Ralph Roberts and his review team for their work. This is a thorough and substantial report. I would also like to express my thanks to the women, families and service users and to the staff and professionals across NHS Grampian, NHS Highland and the wider Scottish Health Service who shared their views and experiences to help shape this report. I am considering all of the recommendations carefully. At this stage, the Government does not rule out any options moving forward. We will rightly meet with local people, clinicians and elected representatives to hear first-hand from them." Tory peer Michelle Mone accused of sending racist and abusive message. The Conservative peer Michelle Mone has been accused of sending a racist message to a man of Indian heritage who alleged in an official complaint that she told him he was a waste of a white man's skin, unquote. The phrase was allegedly used in a WhatsApp message sent by the Tory member of the House of Lords in June 2019 during a disagreement following a fatal yacht crash off the coast of Monaco. The message was part of a series of WhatsApp exchanges, screenshots of which have been sent to the House of Lords Commissioner for Standards as part of a complaint alleging that Michelle Mone sent racist and abusive messages. In a report in The Guardian, the paper said it had seen the complaint and screenshots of the exchanges in which Michelle Mone also appears to make derogatory remarks about the mental health of the man's partner, describing her as a mental loony and a nutcase bird. The Commissioner had responded that he was unable to investigate Baroness Mone because the messages were not sent in the course of her parliamentary duties. When contacted by The Guardian, a representative of the Tory peer initially said, "Baroness Mone is 100% not a racist. Baroness Mone and her husband have built up over 15 schools in Africa in the last 3 years." Scottish Greens say Scotland must plan for the end of the age of oil and gas. Responding to reports that Shell has pulled out of the Cambo oil field off Shetland, Scottish Greens Energy and Climate spokesman Mark Ruskell MSP said, "Today's news shows that Scotland is approaching the end of the age of oil and gas, and it's time that governments started planning accordingly. For a company like Shell to publicly state that it is not economically viable to extract oil from this site is hugely significant. Scotland has the potential to lead Europe in offshore renewables with 25% of the continent's offshore renewable energy potential. So in the wake of this announcement, it's clear that the UK government must divert support that has previously been targeted at oil and gas towards industries of the future." Ukraine warns of large-scale Russian offensive in January. Russia has amassed more than 94,000 troops near Ukraine's borders and may be gearing up for a large-scale military offensive at the end of January, Ukraine's defence minister told Parliament on Friday, citing intelligence reports. Alexei Reznikov said Ukraine would not do anything to provoke the situation, but was ready to fight back if Russia launched an attack. He said Ukraine was pressing ahead with the construction of 2 naval bases on its south coast. Ukraine and its NATO allies have sounded the alarm about Russian troop movements near Ukraine's borders this year, sparking worries that a simmering conflict in eastern Ukraine could erupt into open war. President Biden says he is putting together a set of comprehensive initiatives aimed at making it difficult for Russian President Vladimir Putin to move against Ukraine. Answering questions from reporters after a White House speech about the US economy today, the president said that he had not yet spoken to President Putin. A call between the two leaders is anticipated in days. President Biden told reporters that his administration had been in constant contact with Ukraine and the European allies about the situation. Pope says migrants living in gulag conditions amid indifference. Pope Francis said at an emotional meeting with migrants today that he had a responsibility to tell the hard truth about the suffering of refugees, many held in conditions that he compared to those in Nazi and Soviet camps. Francis, who has made defence of migrants and refugees a cornerstone of his pontificate, spoke at the end of his second day in Cyprus, where he met migrants, some of whom will be among the 50 to be relocated to Italy on his initiative over the coming months. Departing from a prepared speech, he said that many people were still asking how Nazi concentration camps or Stalinist gulags in the post-war period could have been allowed to exist. He said, "Brothers and sisters, this is happening today," citing conditions for refugees in camps in Libya and elsewhere, to where they are forcibly returned when expelled from Europe. They have ended up in concentration camps where women are sold, men are tortured, and people enslaved, he said. After listening to some of our migrants' stories, the Pope said, "The worst thing is that we are getting used to it. This indifference is a grave disease for which there is no antibiotic." The 84-year-old pontiff said he regretted having to speak about such unpleasant things, but added, "It is my responsibility to open eyes." New ways of working with Scotland's businesses. Economy Secretary Kate Forbes has collaborated with leading business organisations to launch a business principles agreement. The agreement sets out plans to refresh how the Scottish Government will work in partnership with businesses to drive economic recovery and transformation. In an open letter to businesses across Scotland, Ms Forbes makes clear that businesses and business organisations should be involved throughout the development of policy where appropriate. It also pledges that the Scottish Government will ensure lived business experience is at the centre of policy design, which will be evidence-based. Support local traders this Christmas. Economy Secretary Kate Forbes has urged people to support their local independent traders ahead of Small Business Saturday. After a very challenging period for all businesses across the country, Ms Forbes has encouraged people to think local this festive season while adhering to the essential public health restrictions, including taking a lateral flow test before socialising or meeting other households, which are in place to help keep everyone safe. To help limit the spread of COVID, people are being asked to take up the offer of vaccination and boosters when eligible, wash their hands regularly, and wear a face covering when in stores. The Scottish Government is encouraging people to go out and support all types of small local businesses, including those which trade online, in stores or in offices. Okay, Linda and Andrew, so those are our main quick stories tonight, and we haven't really got time to discuss everything, but we obviously need to discuss the Omicron variant, which has clearly broken out in at least 2 places in Scotland. So it's no longer the case of is it going to come here? It's the case it is here already and spreading. So first of all, Linda, how alarmed are you at the new Omicron variant?
I don't think I would go as far as to say I'm alarmed. I'm worried about it, of course I am. Not that surprised. I think generally people are aware that this is around for a long time. It hasn't, we didn't get a wave of a virus, get vaccinated and it all went away. We've known for all sorts of reasons that there's going to be variants, that this may be something that's around for a long, long time. I heard one of the scientific experts the other day saying at least 10 years before we totally have it under control, however that's done. But for all sorts of reasons, including, the fact that people in other parts of the world don't have access to vaccines, same as we do. I'm a bit worried that community transmission has kicked in. That's now 2 events that have been identified by the government and its health teams. A bit worried about that, but somewhat heartened, I have to say, by having been out in Glasgow today for the first time for a while. It was very, very busy. I was surprised how busy it was. But it was very plain to me that the vast majority of people are still social distancing, are still wearing masks, and are taking care. It's become just part of everyday life now, I think. Folk have got used to it. So that would ease any alarm that I might have. People are taking responsibility.
Yes, on that point, yes,
Yeah.
I came in by bus today to the centre of Glasgow, and I think everyone on my bus was wearing a mask. But on that point, Andrew, do you think the messaging from the government is clear? Is there a problem with different messages from Edinburgh and compared to what we hear from Westminster?
I think, Hugh, that's been a problem. It's been a problem since the Scottish Parliament was brought back into effect. Westminster usually makes it plain that it's intending to take a different line or just to express itself in a different way, and that can cause confusion. But I think what that means in turn is that, and we've seen it, I think, work very well during the pandemic, is that the people in Scotland start to recognise and start to listen to both politicians and health and public health advisors in Scotland. They take their news and they take their advice from them first. And indeed, through the pandemic, we've heard from time to time, anecdotally, people in England saying that they much prefer listening to broadcast and information coming from Edinburgh because it's clearer and it's more concise and it's more consistent and it's delivered in a more sensible and professional manner. So I think the messaging is problematic, but I think if we continue, we've heard Jason Leach talking today about his position on the very preliminary data that he's beginning to see from South Africa, and as you maybe remember, I've been a great fan of Professor Leach's messaging throughout the pandemic. For example, his time working with a broadcaster in Pacific Key and participating on sports programs on a Saturday and being prepared to answer any question to anybody and to talk in a very honest and straightforward manner. So that messaging helps. And I think also we have seen through the pandemic the emergence of a number of public health professors and experts in Scotland again who have been very supportive and have worked with the Scottish government. So I'm thinking in, for example, Professor Devi Sridhar, who I know she tweeted yesterday, I think, with regard to Omicron, saying that in her view, it looks like the Omicron is more transmissible than the Delta variant. It looks like the Omicron variant can reinfect those who have already had the Delta variant. She also said that it's likely that vaccines will protect people against severe infection. And finally, she said that the priority should be vaccination and making sure that we slow the impact of this variant on Scotland's NHS. So I think if people are concentrating on the messaging that we're seeing from Edinburgh, then the message is getting across loud and clear.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think we can all agree with that. Listen to the health professionals now. But on that point, Linda, I did have a look at what's described today as a stark warning by the SAGE committee in London. Obviously, the Scottish Government and its advisors work closely with SAGE, so there isn't any kind of split there. But in spite of what Andrew just said, there is, of course, a lot of uncertainty. But what they're warning today is that it looks like there's a possibility that the new variant can escape immunity. So they're pretty sure it can escape immunity, but they don't know by how much.
Yeah.
They don't know to what extent, and they don't know how ill you're going to get if it does happen. So big uncertainty.
Yeah, there's still a way to go. I mean, I think the experts were very clear about that. Even when the first couple of cases from South Africa were identified, when the South African government let the rest of the world know, the experts were very clear. We will, as quickly as possible, let you know all the effects of this. And that's why I think people generally are taking care. And to pick up on this thing about the different messaging from both sides of the border, I'm really concerned, for example, about not just reports I've heard. I have friends who are in this position, who work for the civil service, DWP, being run from London, who are being told to go back to their offices. And, they're saying, well, wait a minute, the Scottish Government, their guidance, their recommendations is that people work from home where possible. Surely government employees should be taking the lead in that. And then you get that Rees-Mogg fellow standing up in Parliament yesterday telling Scottish MPs, well, it's absolutely ridiculous, of course people should go back to their work, to paraphrase him. So, they should have a bit more respect for what the Scottish Government are saying and for what Scotland's health experts are saying. If the Scottish Government and health experts are saying work from home where possible, they have absolutely no right to try and overrule that as far as I'm concerned. In fact, they should be a bit more definite about containing this south of the border as well. I know the economy is important, but I think one thing that Nicola Sturgeon has done has made it very plain that for her, public health is the priority. I'm not sure that that's what the priority is with the UK government.
Yes, the First Minister did indeed spell that out on Monday in a speech to the online conference. Another point I'd like both of you to consider on that one. Of course, the current outbreak was first identified in South Africa. I don't suppose we really know where it came from, and by the time it had been identified, it may well have been out for several weeks somewhere. But let's assume that Southern Africa is the source. I think 6 Southern African countries were immediately put on the red list. But does this tell us something that we should have guessed all along, that the unvaccinated poor half of the world is, if you like, a factory generating new variants? So is it really our fault for giving ourselves 3 or how many, 4 maybe vaccinations and not actually sending vaccinations or allowing third world countries to generate their own vaccines? Andrew, what do you think? We've got a north-south issue here?
Well, there's a number of things, and at the risk of being glib for 1 second, and I'll just be very briefly glib. Given that the 3 variants that we've identified during this pandemic have arisen in Kent, India, and South Africa, it certainly sounds like there's some kind of colonial aspect to the way in which this virus is evolving. If it's all parts of the former British Empire. However, I'll stop being glib. I think I think there are a number of issues here. We know that several 100,000 vaccinations were destroyed in the UK 2 weeks ago because they'd gone out of date, and from that, I think it is clear that there is not sufficient coordination and cooperation between nations to make sure that that vaccines that are available are used. We know that the UK has overordered by tens of millions of doses, and so I think it's incumbent upon us, having spent that money, to be making sure that it's used in the best possible way, and that means that vaccines are not wasted. I think there's also an issue that the steps to allow the intellectual property rights in the vaccines to be properly shared with other manufacturers, particularly in places like India, which is a huge biotech industry, in order that the production of cheap vaccines can be scaled up tremendously. As I understand it, the EU is still dragging its feet in respect of the development of the sharing of the intellectual property rights, and that is hindering efforts to begin manufacturing by other producers rather than those who created and invented these vaccines. So yes, issues I'm bound to say that were flagged very early on in the pandemic, and it appears that for whatever reason, not very much has been done to address these. So I think that, on the one hand, we heard some South Africans complaining, feeling that with the closing of air routes that South Africa was being punished. I think in contrast, we need to recognise, firstly, the success of the public health services in South Africa in identifying and isolating this variant so quickly. And secondly, we need to recognise that, having played their part, that we need to play our part too. And that involves doing everything that we can, firstly, to share vaccines that we have here with them efficiently and effectively, so they're not wasted, and secondly, that we allow vaccine manufacturers in other countries, including India and South Africa, we encourage and allow them and permit them to begin production locally in order that vaccine production is increased.
Yes, exactly. I did hear, in fact, what happened is that the South African testers found something strange, something anomalous in the results, and when they looked into it, they found actually this is a new variant, and as soon as they found that, they told everyone. So, yep, that's of course what you're supposed to do with scientific research. But as the WHO says, until we're all safe, rich and poor countries, none of us is safe.
Well, that's right. And there were commitments made. It wasn't just that there were warnings given. Commitments were made by the World Health Organization on behalf of all the countries it represents. And the target for sending vaccines to those that find it more difficult to get them have just not been met at all. And it's a difficult one, you know. The obligation of any government is to look after their own people first. I get that. Of course I get it. But our own people will not be safe until everyone else is as safe as they can be as well. You know, as you've just said, Hugh, and as the WHO has said. So we have to look at the bigger picture here. And yes, these variants will keep arising until we truly give help to those that need it most.
Yep. Again, I think this is clearly an issue we're going to come back to. Obviously, Omicron isn't going to go away anytime soon, and let's hope we don't see any further variants. But we won't be surprised if that does, in fact, happen. Okay, so we're going to look at a second topic, looking back now at the end of the week on a couple of the major stories which have risen for Scotland. We're now turned to the question of support for independence. Should there be a potential referendum in the future? There was a report published this week by a television channel who commissioned a report by Ipsos Mori, and it produced on the headline question, should Scotland be an independent country? The result was 55% for and 45% against, an exact reversal, of course, of the result in the 2014 referendum. Okay, so Linda, just one report, first of all.
Yes.
What's your feeling? Do you think this maybe indicates a change, or is this an outlier? What do you think?
Oh, I don't think it's necessarily an outlier, but I'm always quite cautious. I like to see steady progress. I mean, I was delighted at the result, don't get me wrong. I'm absolutely delighted because for so long we've had round about the 50, you know, whether just below or just above, and that's quite a jump. And it's quite interesting that when the result of our first referendum was 55 to, I was going to say to remain, but it was the no referendum, the no and yes, 55 no. There was great crowing about it being an outstanding result. You know, the unionists were saying, oh, that's definitive, the people have spoken. And on the results of this poll, it's 55% yes, and they're like, oh, that's a very small margin, you know. Mm-hmm. So no, I'm really pleased about it. But what was interesting was I had a look at a breakdown of the demographics and the figure, and fascinating. I think it's the over 55s, of which I am one, who are the least keen on the idea of independence, who are the most cautious, the most risk averse, everything else. And you know, I just don't get it. I think it was over 55s, but it was all punters like me anyway. And I just don't get it because we're getting hammered, you know, really low pensions. Like there is, what's happening with the virus and everything else. No care at all really taken. Yet still don't think that not only can we do it on our own and take our own decisions, but that's something that they should leave as a legacy for their children and their grandchildren, a better country, a better way of doing things, a bit of self-respect, all of that. I find it really difficult to understand. But also, I'm heartened at the results from the younger age groups.
Yes, the results are very stark and very solid support in really the below 40s, I think. I don't have the exact statistics in front of me, but in the lower two age groups, it's something like 71% for yes. So does that mean we just wait? Is Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish Government just waiting till some more young people get their names on the electoral roll? What do you think, Andrew?
Well, I think the First Minister had certainly observed 2 or 3 weeks ago that time is on the side. Time, in a sense, is on the side of the independence movement because of the demographics that you're identifying. So yes, I think that, and of course that statement was leapt upon and misrepresented by the Scottish Tories very briefly, but as ever with the First Minister, she was sticking to the facts, and as we know, and as you say, the demographic direction of travel is very clear, and so as a backstop, you might say that that time is on the side of the independence movement. I think it was interesting with this poll from Ipsos Mori. They use a very different methodology to the other polling companies. They use telephone polling rather than online. And so the only thing that you can do really is compare Ipsos Mori polls with previous Ipsos Mori polls. Now, they polled back in May, just after the Scottish election, and at that point, yes and no were neck and neck at 47%. So it certainly seems that there has been a movement again, and the polling is back to levels where it was probably about a year before that, which is certainly encouraging. I'm minded also that the groundwork for this poll took place, I think, at an interesting. Well, politics is always interesting to some people, but my point is that it took place just after COP26, and Scotland had been on the world stage, even in our media, a great deal during COP26. It was as and Linda will be frustrated with this, so I'll not say Tory sleaze, as Tory corruption and fraud started to dominate the front pages and the headlines in the news. This groundwork was being carried out, and of course, this groundwork also took place at the same time as the 1 million free newspapers produced by the SNP, the National and Business for Scotland, started to be delivered through letterboxes the weekend of the 18th, 19th of November. Now, we're not finished with that. I know that because I'll be delivering those tomorrow in Muirhouse, I think. But the combination of those events, the success, the hard work, and the success that we saw with the Scottish Government's work during COP26 and the coverage of it on international media, combined with the appearance in hard form of arguments for independence and being delivered by an army of volunteers across the country, and then the cherry on the cake with Tory fraud and corruption starting to dominate again. So I think the groundwork may have taken place at a very fortuitous time, but again, when compared to the last Ipsos Mori poll, it shows a definite step in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I haven't actually seen the famous newspaper myself. Yeah, I'd forgotten that might well have been a factor. But so obviously I've not made my mind up yet, so I'll wait until that comes through my door and I'll give it a fair reading. Now, so Andrew mentioned the demographics. The other issue we discussed the other night when Professor John Robinson was on was about the geographical split, because I think 7 out of the 8 regions that Ipsos Mori used voted yes, and we already discussed, so I'm not going to go for it again. The south of Scotland, around Dumfries and Galloway, was the one that was very slightly, not by a huge amount, but very slightly no was in the lead. But the other interesting demographic side of it is social class. And I don't really know what this means, but I noticed in Ipsos Mori, they still use the old-fashioned idea that you're an A or a B or a C, or a C1 or a C2 or a D or an E, which is, a bit outmoded, because what exactly is it's working class, middle class. Working class are posh, right? Now, the reason I'm going on about this is because, basically, posh people are more likely to vote no, and working class people are more likely to vote yes. So that's really what that boils down to.
Here's me thinking I was quite posh too.
Well, no, compared to me. But the thing is, I suppose what we're saying is, what I'm getting at is this Scotland's version of the Red Wall Rebellion, where Labour have lost control of their former working class strongholds in the north of England, just as 10 years ago they lost control of their strongholds in Scotland?
No, I think it's very different. I can't back that up. I'm not going to be able to give you lots of intellectual and academic arguments for that. And if John Curtis is watching, he's probably saying, what's she talking about? But no, I think it's a bit different from that, because the Tories haven't been dominant right across Scotland for a long time. So it was Labour and then it was the SNP. And in terms of where the politics is centred, which is left of centre, is very different. And the rhetoric and the language is very different as well. we didn't have the level of lies, cheating and nastiness that went on in some of the, what we're now calling these areas in the north of England in relation to the Brexit referendum. So I don't think we can take the effect of the appalling way that the Brexit referendum was run away from what happened in constituencies in the north of England. People up here didn't buy it the same. So I think that it's actually very, very different. And I think there's a trust in the SNP, even aside from the independence question, because it's quite obvious from the results we get that a lot of people vote SNP because they believe that that's going to be the best government in Scotland. They may not necessarily believe in independence. So I think there's an awful lot more to it than being able to make that comparison.
Okay, so it's not as simple as that. But the clash thing also maybe is in Scotland is a bit of an east-west split. Obviously, Glasgow, Paisley, North Lanarkshire, Dumbarton, Greenock, all these places voted yes. Edinburgh voted no.
Explain that, Andrew Wilson. Yes.
No, I don't think Andrew. I wonder what Andrew thought of the idea that Brexit might make those the middle-class professionals of Edinburgh think, we backed the wrong horse last time.
Interesting question.
Yes, I think there are a number of components in there. On the one hand, I'm in terms of working on the ground. I live in Edinburgh West, and as I just said, I'll be delivering leaflets in Muirhouse tomorrow morning. Some of the poorest parts of some of the poorest housing in the city, and in the same constituency, we have the single most expensive house. And I remember campaigning before going from one to the other one morning. So I think I don't think the divides are quite so stark as they might be in urban environments in south of the border. I'm also reminded we've seen the results from the Bexley and Sidcup by-election overnight, and that reminded me that there are parts of England, Kensington and Chelsea, for example, where it will be perpetually blue and perpetually Tory until the end of time. Whereas in every constituency across Scotland, it does not play out like that. The majority of constituencies are, of course, SNP supporting, but that means that rural constituencies, fishing communities, and to your point, very urban constituencies, all are able to return SNP MPs and MSPs. So I think I think in Scotland we don't see the same hard delineation. If you're walking along the street in Kensington and Chelsea, you're in Kensington and Chelsea, and that to a lesser extent is true, of course, of leafy parts of all sorts of bits of Scotland. But I don't think it bites to quite the same extent. So I think the voters in Edinburgh West got certainly. Brexit is definitely on their minds. The Edinburgh West was the most anti-Brexit constituency in the country in 2016, and that the wishes of the voters here were rejected. I think still plays. It's been difficult to get that message really to bite, despite many efforts, but I think there is a recognition, and certainly I think as Brexit starts to bite now properly, I think people's recognition of the implications of remaining yoked to Westminster, and as a result, Scottish voters do not get the governments and do not get the policies that they want. I think as Brexit really starts to bite, then we'll see a bit more progress in that direction.
And as we move on, we are, of course, in a long, slow war of attrition on moving towards a referendum. I noticed Martin Kettle today in The Guardian described this actually as a very slow, careful campaign, both by Nicola Sturgeon and by Prime Minister Johnson or whoever takes over from him. And basically he's saying they're playing a long game. Both of them are playing a very long game of chess. What do you think are his winning chess pieces?
Well, again, this is entirely speculation from me. I mean, I have thought for a long time that Nicola Sturgeon and those who are close to her are playing a long game, and I respect that very much. I'm not convinced that Boris Johnson is, because I'm not convinced that he's capable of thinking beyond his nose, to be honest. And I don't know if those round about him give enough thought to what's happening in Scotland. To me, it's much more of an arrogance with them. It's just like, no, it's not happening, and that's that. I don't think there's a long game being played on that side at all. It gives them too much credence, to be honest.
Well, yeah, he's perhaps not known, Prime Minister Johnson, for his strategic planning, but I think the long game idea is that basically, Andrew, that Scots will get used to it. They didn't vote for Brexit, but they'll get used to it. So as Brexit plays out next year, is that going to mean that the memory of the 2016 vote is going to fade? Or on the other hand, will Brexit just get worse, so people will in fact be more moved towards the yes position?
I think it's going to get worse, frankly.
Yes.
We've seen people talking this week already about the impact that Brexit has had on exports of Scotch whisky, and Tory politicians in England talking about how important the export of Scotch whisky is to the UK's the UK's pretty shocking balance of trade. Remembering that Scotland is the only part of the United Kingdom which has a net positive balance of trade. We're a net manufacturing, net producing, net exporting part of the UK at the moment. So I think as the impacts continue, and indeed potentially the impacts are exacerbated, and also our friends in Europe begin to make their positions clearer. I'm thinking of the Belgian ports last week who were starting to say that they wanted to begin to prepare for Scotland's independence and opening trade routes to Scotland. I think the implications of Brexit are going to continue. One of the other things that we've heard this week, Joe Cherry writing in the National yesterday or today, I think, making the point that as part of the broader Brexit experiment is the unshackling of Westminster from the European Court on Human Rights and the tearing up of the Human Rights Act, which is the current main legislation for human rights in the UK. Now, we know that the devolution settlement in Northern Ireland is fundamentally based on the Human Rights Act and the European legislation behind it remaining in force. We know that the devolution settlement for Scotland fundamentally relies on the protection of human rights that's afforded by participation in the European Court of Human Rights and the Human Rights Act. So if a dogmatic Dominic Raab gets his way and starts to tear those fairly important institutions and constitutional pillars up, I think, and is doing that expressly as part of taking back control as part of Brexit. I think the distance between Scotland and the rest of the UK, the distance between the Westminster and Holyrood, and the distance between the wishes, the ambitions, the desires of the people of Scotland and voters south of the border, I think it's just going to become plainer and plainer until it's undeniable.
And can I add to what Andrew said there, because these are all really big things, huge issues. The ECHR issue is a massive one for the Scottish Parliament and of course for Northern Ireland. But so many things, it's the small things that people start to notice that really make a difference. And COVID has actually hidden quite a lot of the effects of Brexit as it affects the day-to-day lives of individuals and families. And I would use, for example, travel. Right? It sounds small at the moment in the greater scheme of things and what we're all suffering. But this is going to kick in. I mean, Spain introduced new regulations the other day, as you know, because of the Omicron variant. And when you actually read on the Spanish government's website how this affects people visiting Spain, it talks about testing required for all tourists, except those who hold European Union passports. Bracket, this does not include UK. UK is now in with the rest of the world, and from what I read, it looks like they're considering introducing special testing and a form of quarantine for visitors from the UK who go to Spain on holiday. How long that will last, I don't know. But it's just one of these examples of how Brexit is hitting people that people haven't even realised, whether it's through a wee bit of arrogance here and there that, you know, the Brits particularly think that they can just do anything they like and that they're welcome anywhere in the world and all the rest of it. And I mean, some Scots are Brits, let's face it, and feel exactly the same way. So until these things really start to hit people individually and affect their families, that's when the real discontent will start. And the other side of that is, it was mentioned earlier about COP26 and the international impact of Scotland. There's been work going on for years and years with the Scottish Government and many, many others to maintain our friendships with those countries within the EU and beyond, to push Scotland's case for the right for a referendum and the right to self-determination if that's what people choose. So these things are equally as important as the big things that will affect us collectively. So there's the collective effects and there's individual effects, and that's what will make people really start to think about the constitutional future.
Yes, I guess most Brexiteers probably don't know that we are now officially regarded in Europe as a third country,
Yes.
which third-class country. So if that phrase is used a bit more often, you know, people think, why did we vote for that? Well, I think we better leave it there just now because obviously that's an issue that's going to be returned to. I expect in the spring, the First Minister did say, just to underline that point on Monday, that of course first COVID and Omicron, which she didn't even know about much on Monday, comes first. But secondly, that the Scottish Parliament will be discussing the referendum bill early in the new year, sometime in the spring. So obviously this is an issue that's going to come back. So we're going to finish tonight discussing, I hope people don't mind, but if you're watching us, you're obviously a fan of Broadcasting Scotland. So we'd like to spend the final few minutes discussing our future, how we can grow this organisation. And let me just outline, first of all, if you're not like Linda in the studio, and Andrew's been here. I think you're often online in Edinburgh, but you know what we have in here. But this is what we've been doing with your money. If you are one of our subscribers, we have actually a really large amount of very expensive equipment here. Which
I'm really
often told-
expensive.
And yes, and that, you're the software, Linda, right? I'm talking about the hardware. Now, well, there's a lot of things. Let me just put it this way: there's an awful lot of things in here which I'm told not to touch. Right?
Oh, me too. I wouldn't dare touch them.
So
I'm sitting on my hands.
We've been investing heavily, and in fact, we did some of this during the COP26 because we actually hosted people from Bosnian TV working for CNN, and CNN actually did live reports from right here and from outside broadcast using Broadcasting Scotland equipment and staff. So that's where your money's gone. We've got enough stuff really to do around the world, live reporting using 5G right from where it happens. So a lot of stuff, right? We need more people. Andrew, what's your ideas on what to do next to grow Broadcasting Scotland?
Well, Hugh, I think you're absolutely right. We know that Broadcasting Scotland has the ambition, and as you say, crucially, also has the physical infrastructure to scale up their operations and to scale up their operations enormously, producing a greater number of programs and a wider range of programs. However, as we also know, that process of scaling up will need permanent paid staff. It is people that make programs, and so the need to begin to grow the workforce and a paid workforce is the next step in the evolution of the station. And so the approach to providing a Scottish-based media organisation and news organisation, and without labouring the point, bearing in mind that none of the media organisations that we see elsewhere in Scotland are actually based in Scotland. The television broadcasters are headquartered in London or traded on the London Stock Exchange. Our radio stations are controlled from Hamburg in Germany, and the main daily newspapers are controlled from London and from Virginia, from McLean in Virginia. So we struggle with it because we have no major indigenous and especially broadcast media to speak of now in Scotland. And so the way to address that is to build it ourselves And in order to build it ourselves, already Broadcasting Scotland has invested in the facilities and the hardware, and has demonstrated that by producing programmes like this one. And so the next step is to add more. You were describing, Linda, as software there. I remember back in the IT industry, people used to be described as wetware in comparison to the machinery and the code. So we need. I will not describe anyone as wetware, but we need. We need the Broadcasting Scotland needs the funding in order to appoint and retain the people, because people make programmes.
Yes, it's all about public sector broadcasting. Public service. Public service broadcasting. What we're seeking to do in Broadcasting Scotland is to give voters, give citizens in Scotland the information they need to make decisions, to make choices on the things we'll face, and we need that now, moving up to the referendum, and we'll need it afterwards. Well, whichever way the referendum goes, in fact, we still need independent broadcasting. Linda, do you think, is it important to defend the idea of public service broadcasting rather than leaving it to market forces, as Andrew said? Radio's all run by private companies.
I'm a great believer in public service broadcasting. I think there's a space for it. But you know what I really like about this channel, Broadcasting Scotland, is that no matter what we're talking about, we're seeing it and discussing it through a Scottish prism, you know, and it's about how things are seen from Scotland. You know, when you look at the work that we did with CNN, you know, with ICA and over COP26, and we've done stuff with ICA before, and we'll carry on doing it. I mean, that's great stuff. It's Scotland's view of what's happening in other places of the world, not another country's view. You know, it's about, when we say the health service, we mean in Scotland. We don't mean in England, and then for 5 seconds at the end they say, oh, it's a bit different in Scotland, actually. Sometimes they don't even bother saying it at all. So seeing things from a Scottish perspective from Scotland is hugely important. And, you know, you talked about the equipment, and we joked about being frightened to touch it. I'm frightened to touch it, but look at this studio. I mean, it's as good as anything that you see on terrestrial TV, you know, by the main broadcasting companies. It's every bit as good. And the outside broadcasts are every bit as good as well, you know. So I would really like people to recognise that here we have a channel that is, in fact, talking for Scotland and reflecting what's happening in Scotland first and foremost. And, you know, we need resources. And it's not just about money, it's also about the work that volunteers are doing here is fantastic. We need more volunteers. And, you know, what a grounding for somebody that's wanting to make a career in broadcasting to come into a studio like this with the equipment that's here and the expertise that those of us who draft folk like us in have. A wonderful opportunities. So for everyone that feels it's really important for Scotland to have that kind of service, I would really, you know, say please consider how you can help Broadcasting Scotland, because Broadcasting Scotland's doing a great job.
Yep, we hope to be here in the long term, and as Linda says, we do actually want to get people employed, and this, not necessarily me, you know. I'm retired, so I can give a bit of time off. But what we really do want to do, we're very, very keen to employ some of the students. We have a number of students of journalism from colleges in Glasgow who regularly come in and contribute some work behind the scenes. And we would love to be able to say to them, right, once you've qualified, we've got a placement for you here, a paid placement. We'd love to be able to do that at living wage. But we just don't have the resources to do it at the moment. Now, as we move into the new year, we're going to do our best to seek further funding. I don't know if there's really any funding that we can get. I mean, it'd be lovely to get a slice of what the BBC gets.
Just a tiny wee slice would be wonderful.
1% would be about 10 times more than what we have at the moment. Yeah. So we've got tremendous gear. In fact, I did actually show somebody around who works for another broadcaster, professional, recently, and they were very impressed by what we've got and our technical capabilities. So there's no doubt about it. We've got the skill and the ambition and the equipment, but we do need more money. I'll come to that in a minute. But before I wind up with our usual passing the plate around, I'll just say a wee bit about our plans for a new year. We are hoping to do music, and we've already done some. But this Tuesday we did a music show, but you missed it, I gather, from our conversation earlier on, Linda. Aye, you can buy it. It's still on YouTube. It's always there. But we found that there was actually nothing on the BBC or on STV for St Andrew's Day, so we did our own wee show last Tuesday. It's astonishing that the BBC Scotland, Scottish television, didn't even do Scotland's National Day. Weird. So we definitely want to do more music, but that's going to be quite... Well, we do have the outside broadcast van, so we do actually have all of that equipment there. Mm-hmm. So as I might have mentioned the other day on Tuesday, we could come to your town and we could put on a show. We could put on a ceilidh, and that's one of the things we'd like to do in New Year. And we'll go anywhere as long as we've got a bit of money to pay
and
for
you
the
don't
diesel.
need to worry because it's not me.
But so we are definitely going to do that. We are definitely going to put on. That's a promise. We will be putting on ceilidhs. There will be accordions next year, and that's our guarantee. So I think I better move on to concluding the programme in the usual way. I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you for money. So as I often say, watching this, you're already helping. So thank you for being one of our viewers, and please tell other people about it. But we have a lot of people who are keeping us going, in fact, by subscribing on that site you can see on the screen just now. So if you'd like to go onto the Broadcasting Scotland, you'll see a link. And if you want to become one of our subscribers just through PayPal, just a £5 a month would be great to get started. Can I just point out, by the way, Linda, it's 7 years since I paid a BBC licence. I emphasise I'm not watching anything broadcast, so I'm not breaking any laws. So I just did a quick tot up today. That saved me £1,100. So if anyone else wants to make that choice, give us a wee bit of that. You could make your own reallocation of broadcasting resources that way. So please, if you can help at all, that will be great, and we will turn it all into programmes. Lots of stuff we want to do. We've got loads of new programmes we want to make. So we're going to start off with music as soon as possible. We might even get some more music out before this year's ended. So thanks for watching again tonight. And once again, Andrew, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for coming in from Edinburgh.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Hugh.
And well done for all the work you're doing, delivering the debates on Scotland's future. I look forward to getting that if it comes over to the south side of Glasgow. And Linda Fabiani on the studio, well, thank you for coming in again. It's always
Absolute
a pleasure. It's a pleasure always to see you on the programme. It's the first time I've actually been on a programme with you. So great, let's do that again. Okay, so thanks to Linda and Andrew and to the team here putting the programmes. And I better just say before we go, we are all volunteers, and some of us are very, very stressed and having a hard time. And I'm afraid we weren't actually able to put out a programme yesterday. Just too much going on, and we just couldn't manage to get it together. So this quick hour takes us it takes probably about 10 person hours to put it together. So I might be in here 4 or 5 hours before the programme, and other people are also working in it. So I'm afraid last night we just couldn't manage it. So I'm sorry about that. It's our intention to do Scotland at 7, 5 days a week, and we usually do. So finally, let's get look ahead to the full Scottish on Sunday, and I think you're doing that, aren't you, Andrew?
I'll be there.
Right, great. So I'll tune in myself, and I look forward to seeing that one. Okay, so thanks for watching Scotland at 7 tonight. So from me, Hugh Stewart, from Linda Fabiani, and from Andrew Wilson in Edinburgh, good night, and we'll see you later. Thanks.